Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
Ahora empieza su programa, el show del doctor Roy Aranda. Temas sobre los efectos que tiene la separación de los niños de sus padres, traumas que afrontan los indocumentados, violencia doméstica, el porqué de la violencia en las escuelas. Llámanos en vivo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 6, y haz tus preguntas al aire. ¡Comenzamos!
Muy buenas noches, queridos televidentes. Good evening, my dear Tribuna TV viewers. We have another show tonight, Thursday, November 21st, noviembre 21. Tenemos un show muy interesante para ustedes. The show is entitled, in English, Challenges and Choices in Having a Child. En español, Desafíos y Opciones en Tener un Hijo. So we have a very special guest, Dr. Carolyn AlRoy, and I'll be introducing her momentarily. She is an expert in this field, a psychologist, as am I, but her area of expertise, among other things, this is one of her areas of expertise, the topic for tonight, in handling alternative kinds of ways of having a child if for whatever reason biologically you're not able to. So I did want to tell my viewers, quiero decirles a todos, the show is in fact being recorded on YouTube Live, and by tomorrow the recording will be available on Tribuna TV's website, Vimeo, Facebook, and other platforms. So el show está grabado, estará en Tribuna TV, estará en Vimeo y también en Facebook. So by all means, if you're not able to watch or completely see the entire show, or you're unable to make the show live, you certainly can see it once it's posted on several electronic platforms. So without further ado, let me just start by asking Oscar. I think I've introduced Oscar to you last time we were here. Oscar became part of the show. We had a wonderful guest, Dr. Howard Rambam. We were talking about occupational injuries, and Oscar had a car accident, and I think I was able to show you a photo of the car. It's amazing that he was able to be here functioning as well as he usually does. So today, I don't see any bruises anymore. Tú estás mejor, yeah? Yeah, no more black and blues. All righty. So we have 8 slides, and I will be asking Oscar from time to time just to put up a slide. So to start, para empezar, por favor, slide 1. Let's get started with slide 1. And then I'll give you an idea of what the show will cover, and then I will introduce at length Dr. Carolyn AlRoy and let her add a couple of more comments that I may be missing. So the inspiration for this show is a situation involving a gentleman, a psychologist who I met through New York State Psychological Association years ago. And I became close to him. He lives in another state, and we maintained communication through emails, and I got to know him more and more, and we became close friends despite the distance, which is like really remarkable in and of itself. And we were involved in doing professional activities together, and we text one another regularly and share photos and emails, and in many ways he's been like a peer mentor, helping out when I've had themes on these shows, and I've always asked him for some input. But in essence, he shared, and I felt very privileged to learn that he and his husband were looking to become parents. So I embraced the emotional experience as he shared the process. It was a long process, and I know that Dr. AlRoy will speak about things such as finances and how long it takes going forward with some of the processes that we'll be talking about. But it culminated in a remarkable birth, and I did want to share that with you. It is in his honor and his husband Dave and little baby Aaron who you can see. I have the photos there. They were kind enough to allow me to post these intimate photos. Ron, my good friend, Dave, his husband, and their little baby boy, Aaron. So that's the inspiration for the show. And it was after knowing this, I decided I have to do something special. Por favor, slide 2, Oscar. So this is an extremely broad topic, and for those of you who follow the show, you know that I like to start by giving some sort of definitions of what the show or what the topic consists of, what are the definitions, some idea of statistical background, what are the numbers involved, what's the impact on our society. In this particular case, dealing with these kinds of issues for today, definitions of adoption, in vitro fertilization, IVF, egg donation. There's also sperm donation as well. There's other things. Statistics, how open do we see this? How many people are there who are interested in the process? What does the process consist of going through IVF, egg donation, adoption? Give you some sense. What's the psychological journey? There are ups and downs, emotional ups and downs. What is it that a person who wants to have a child and has to go through this kind of a process, what are some of the emotions that person's likely to experience over time? Lastly, as the show comes closer to an end, we're going to offer some practical suggestions for the viewers. Many viewers either have gone through this process, are currently experiencing some aspect of either an adoption or going for in vitro fertilization or concern with egg donors, foster care, foster adoption. There's different kinds of adoptions. So we're going to look at some kinds of suggestions for the viewers who might be interested in it either presently or going forward, and also resources. What's out there? What are some references that the viewers can refer to? So I'd like to now take the time and introduce my guest, Dr. Carolyn AlRoy. So you have her right there. Hi, say hello to everybody. So Dr. AlRoy, she is, I know her through New York State Psychological Association. She's a psychologist. She has a Doctor of Psychology degree, which is the same degree as I have. So we're on the same page there. And she's a Doctor of Psychology, teacher, and performance coach. She's an expert at resolving resistance to success, peak creativity, and change for the past 20 years. She earned her doctorate in psychology from Pace University. Dr. AlRoy has been quoted in a variety of publications, and she's been featured on local and national television, including, PIX, Channel 11. I think it's Channel 11, right? WPIX? Jornal Nacional, U.S. News and World Report. Dr. AlRoy sees individuals and couples in her Midtown Manhattan office, and at the end of the show, we'll post your address and how people can contact you if they have further questions. She has a general practice with subspecialties in relationship and work career issues. Her passion is to help people and couples follow their dream, which has included expanding their family through donor, egg, and adoption. I was amazed at how thorough your background is in this when you sent me your talking points. There was like 4 pages of talking points that I had to distill into a 1-hour show. So we'll try to get to most of them, if not all of them. Dr. AlRoy, as an aside, she says, Roy, feel free to post this if you want to. And I said, how can I not post this? That she's an accomplished singer, songwriter with 2 CDs of music released in 2006 and 2010. And some of her music has been licensed for use on television. So I don't know, maybe later on you bring your guitar and sing us a little song. So, Carolyn, welcome, Dr. Carolyn AlRoy. Please greet the viewers and add whatever you'd like that I may have missed.
Hi, are we getting feedback? Are you hearing me okay?
Uh-huh.
Oh, great. Okay. So I'm Dr. Carolyn AlRoy, I wanted to mention that the three major ways of becoming a parent that we're going to talk about are IVF, it's called donor egg, and adoption. And I'm going to say a little bit about foster care adoption, but mostly domestic adoption. There's domestic and international. So sperm donation can happen with IVF, and it can happen with donor egg. But technically, their IVF and donor egg are the two different categories. They're both different types of IVF.
Okay, but anything else about your practice or your line of work?
I see probably as many men as women in my practice because I have a focus on work and success. But this is an area that mostly women will come to me. I'll see women about this. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the feelings that can come up. I'm going to try to provide a snapshot, paint an interesting picture, so you kind of get a sense for each different category, all the things that you need to do or consider if you're going to do any of them, and things to look out for, pitfalls, and also the pleasures.
Yeah, it's a very broad topic, as we both mentioned. So we'll probably just touch the surface a bit, but hopefully enough that it gives the viewers really at least a good journeyman level of understanding of what's involved. And for those obviously who are really interested or are going through the process, they'll follow up on some of the suggestions and become very well informed and really seek the kinds of resources and assistance that they need, and not just rely on a single show, but it opens up the door a little bit. Oscar, let's look at the statistics. Slide 3. So I don't pretend that this covers everything, far from it. I just wanted to give the viewers a bit of a sampling of how prevalent this is. We're looking at millions of families that are struggling with infertility every year, okay? I'm not talking about over a 10-year period of time. We're talking annually. We're dealing with millions of families struggling with infertility. Approximately 2 million couples are waiting to adopt. About 10% of women, that comes out to a little bit over 6 million, have difficulty getting or staying pregnant. More than 50% of women facing infertility will pursue adoption. And approximately 7 million women of childbearing age have used fertility treatments to become pregnant. So, Carolyn, anything to add to the statistics?
Nope, nothing to add.
Okay. Let's go on to slide 4. Slide 4, and let's look at some of the definitions. So, adoption at the bottom. Okay, if you go further down, adoption is when a person assumes the parenting of a child from another person's biological or legal parent. Egg donation is, a woman who is donating an egg to enable another woman to conceive. Typically, this will involve the IVF, okay, in vitro fertilization. Going to the top, IVF, in vitro fertilization, is a multi-step procedure. It involves a medical team removing an egg from a woman's ovaries, fertilizing the eggs with sperm in a laboratory. The fertilized embryo is given a few days to grow and then is implanted into a woman's uterus. The process generally takes about 4 to 6 weeks. Approximately 1 million babies were born in the United States between 1987 to 2015 through IVF or other assisted reproductive technologies, abbreviated ART. ART includes IVF, or the use of egg donor, sperm donor, or an adopted embryo. CDC, Centers for Disease Control, reports approximately 4 million births per year, so that's somewhere in the area of 1 to 2% via the in vitro fertilization. So we're going to go now to more of the substance of the show. Let's look at the process. Oscar, por favor, slide 5. So again, this is fairly abbreviated, and I will ask Carolyn to expand on it once I just quickly go over some of the steps involved in the process. Generally it's advisable, obviously, to learn as much as you can about all options. What are your options? What's available to you? You may start knowing fully well what you want to do. You may not be sure. You may want to weigh your options. So do take into consideration different kinds of options that are available and learn as much as you're able to about them. What is the process for each kind of option? What's the process? How long will the process take? What are the kinds of things you have to do? What legalities are involved in the process? There are different legal issues, different processes. What are the medical needs that you may need to consider? What are some of the expenses that might be involved for each one of these categories? What are risks? What happens if you fail and you fail again and you fail again? What sort of risks, financial and other risks, would that entail? How does that affect your self-esteem? How does that affect your relationship if you have a partner? Will there be a child search involved if you are adopting? And if so, what kind of adoption are you considering? Domestic, foster care, international, interracial? And there are a lot of steps in adoption that I know that Carolyn will elaborate a little bit on. Oscar, you can take the slide down. Carolyn, please take it away. I know that this is an area of tremendous expertise for you, so give us some of your insights in the process. And we're also going to be talking right after this about preparing emotionally for the process.
So just a little thing, when we were talking about, you had said that IVF takes about 4 to 6 weeks, which is true, but the thing is, very often you need multiple cycles. So, and for donor egg, that can happen. A woman who's postmenopausal can have a donor egg IVF, take the eggs of a much younger woman. And apparently when you give hormones to a postmenopausal woman, although she has to get checked out first in terms of her health, the uterus, as I've been told, just perks up. And it's the same odds to get pregnant. It's around 50%. So it may take several trials, and it can be unpredictable. So I just wanted to say that.
And there has to be some medical clearance ahead of time, some ability to look at viability, age, things like that must be part of the equation.
Absolutely, because you want to make sure everything is good. They do ultrasound to check out your uterus for donor egg. They look at your overall health. You have to get clearance from your doctor. It's a big procedure. There's a lot to do to make sure that everything is going to go okay. And there is a risk, I don't know the stats on this, of increasing your blood pressure, preeclampsia, premature delivery of the baby. So I don't know the stats on it, but I know that that is a possible risk. So you want to talk to a fertility clinic, you want to talk to a doctor at a fertility clinic who's a specialist, who's a reproductive endocrinologist. And you may want to, if you're an older woman, you might want to talk to fetal maternal, let me get this right, fetal maternal medicine specialist. I think that's right. It's a specialist that looks at risks for, looks at risky pregnancies, and you would get more information from somebody like that.
And these are specialists that are not necessarily doing this pro bono. I assume that there's fees connected with these things, so people need to be prepared as well.
There are fees, yes, there are fees connected. And the thing with insurance is that there's been a lot of advocacy. So I know that if you live in New Jersey, you can your insurance must pay for 4 IVFs, but there's an age limit, which it depends on the state. It could be 40 or 45, and that could be for donor egg or for IVF. And if you're looking at trying to go international, to think I'm going to do some medical tourism and maybe I'll do an IVF or a donor egg in another country, there are even more limitations depending on the country. So if you're a same-sex couple, sometimes you can't do an IVF. If you're single, you may be discriminated against in another country. If you're an older woman, you could be discriminated against. So this is actually a pretty good country to be in if you are considering any of these options.
When you talk about a cycle, and going through several cycles, like you said, maybe it could be 4 cycles. Are there breaks in between the cycles? Is that advisable? Is it back to back to back to back, or?
It depends on what the doctor said. Usually there are breaks, because what happens, I'll tell you a little of the gory details. So when you do an IVF, basically you are given a lot of hormones, which are actually very expensive. And the goal of the hormones is to grow your eggs so that you have a lot of eggs. And there are side effects to these hormones. So some women might become anxious, depending on the drug that you're taking. You're also taking at some point progesterone to increase the lining of your uterus. Women can get anxious, depressed. I mean, besides the drugs, the hormones have side effects as well. But yeah, so you want to take a break from taking all this medication, give your body a rest. So some doctors will recommend an IUI cycle or just a rest. So if you're single and you're trying to get pregnant, they might recommend an IUI cycle that doesn't involve drugs, and basically they're just putting donor sperm in you. They're checking out your own eggs, and then at a certain point you're inseminated with donor sperm. So let me get to my talking points, which I have carefully prepared. I wanted to first talk about the different stressors, because we're talking about the psychological aspects of infertility, of IVF, of donor egg, and of adoption.
Let me just quickly put up slide 7, just to talk in general what some of the psychological impact is, and then we'll take it down and we can sort of cross the process along with the preparing emotionally. But things like, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about a particular process? Do you feel jitters? Are you having second thoughts? Do you have ambivalence, like you're hot for it, then after a while you cool off, or you may have second thoughts? Things like involving the family. Does your family know? How are you going to involve your family? What's the reaction of your family? What emotions over a period of time? Because Carolyn was talking about several cycles. So if you're taking a cycle, taking a break, taking a cycle, obviously your emotions are going to be in a state of flux over a period of time. It's not going to be done in one weekend. So this is, a significant chunk of time, and it's a very significant aspect of your life. So going through the process, what would be your emotions? I threw in raising a child, but that's, already once you have a child, there's going to be emotions involved there as well. Sources of support, which we'll get to, family, friends, agencies, and so forth. So again, you can bring the slide down, and Carolyn, please, I'm sorry to have just cut you off. I just wanted to show some general psychological, emotional reactions ahead of time. You were talking, I think, about the kinds of stressors that you see from your talking points.
Yeah, those were great slides. It was a great introduction to what I'm about to tell you. So one of the first stressors I wanted to talk about was information overload, which can happen with anyone. It can happen with IVF, donor egg, and adoption. So you're basically going to finding out there's a problem in terms of me being able to, on my own, have a child. I'm going to need to see a doctor, or I'm going to need to adopt. And that is a huge hit to the ego. That's a hard pill. That's something that people expect that they can do with absolutely no help. And so that's a big hit to the ego. And then you go from there to getting a ton of information from a doctor or support group, and there's a lot to know about each of these 3 different methods. So, for example, just the trap is there's so much information, and just received this kind of emotional dagger, sort of. And it's easy, especially if you are a person prone to anxiety or obsession, to get very thinky. You have to think. You have to process a lot of information, and sometimes you don't have a lot of time to process it. But it can be a trap, and so I just wanted to say it's as important as it is to process all this information. You can lose touch with your heart, with what you really want, with your gut feeling of what's right for you and what's right for you and your partner. So, and that can actually make a decision more difficult. You can get a little lost. So I always say it's really good to breathe, meditate. If you can take time, and try to get in touch with how you really want to proceed. What's the right thing for you?
Carolyn, with the information overload, is it possible that a person may be pursuing like a wrong avenue because of, maybe focusing more on one thing and excluding other things, and then making decisions later on that he or she would regret, also possibly like a cognitive dissonance? I made this choice, I have to go forward with it no matter what now?
Well, it is possible, and I could give many different examples. You want to make sure you're with the right doctor. You want to make sure that if you're with a doctor, they have a very good lab. The stats are very good for the lab. They're not going to be mixing up files. You want to make sure that you get your finances in order. You want to be realistic about the odds, and you want to have support. And so with adoption, basically with most people go from finding out this is going to be difficult for me to get pregnant, and then they go from there, and you should have a reproductive endocrinologist appointment. So basically, technically, a person will be diagnosed with infertility if a couple tries to get pregnant for a year without any birth control and they're not able to get pregnant. And technically and officially, you may be diagnosed with infertility issues. And then you would go to a reproductive endocrinologist and you kind of get it checked out. So you could go to an OBGYN, but they won't be able to do, they're not as knowledgeable, and you want somebody who really can give you a lot of information about what's going on in your body. So they'll do a series of tests. They'll test your hormones. There's a test for women to see if your tubes are blocked in any way. They check out your health, and then they make a diagnosis, and they'll tell you, we recommend IVF, or we recommend donor egg. So most couples or people go from first IVF, let's see if we can make this happen. And if that doesn't work, then they go to either donor egg or adoption. So most people are going to try to have a child with their own genetic material. They're not going to go, some people go to adoption, but most people start with IVF. That's generally speaking true. But there's a lot to know about each thing, and there's a lot of in terms of adoption, in terms of information overload with adoption. It's really important to sit down and consider the situations that you are most comfortable with. So, am I comfortable with an interracial child? Do I feel any need to have a child of my own race? Am I okay having a child with addiction? What will that mean? What am I willing to accept a child with a diagnosis? You have to kind of think about this early on and think about what you're comfortable with, and maybe talk to a doctor who's familiar with, who can educate you. Increasingly, people are taking children who have addictions or who are born with addictions. And you will definitely have to sit down with your partner and see if you're on the same page. If you're on the same page with adoption, and if you're on the same page with the type of child that you're both comfortable with. So there's the sort of information overload aspect. Then there's the financial aspect. So all of these things that we're talking about are very expensive processes. So if you're looking at IVF, like I mentioned before, insurance may help you out. It depends on the state that you're in. I know New Jersey does. You live in New Jersey, they will fund for IVFs. If you are, I think, younger than 40 or younger or something like that. But as you know, it can be very stressful to deal with insurance. There's a lot of visits that are submitted. Some insurance companies are better than others, and you want to make sure that your insurance is going to cover the IVFs, or you want to know what the cost is. The good thing is that there's transparency in pricing for IVFs and for donor egg. For a lot of medical procedures that are elective, there's not such transparency. But basically, you can get this information. You can know a cycle will cost this amount of money. The medication will cost this amount of money. The sperm donor, if you're using one, will cost this amount of money. This is how much it is for 6 donor eggs. Like, you can get that information. It's still overwhelming. You still have to add everything up, and you have to ask what is the range of the total cost, and ask the clinic to add it up for you. But they will be transparent. Still, you won't know how many cycles you may need. So you might not know the entire cost of a successful IVF or donor egg. And with adoption, it's a very expensive process. It's kind of like signing a blank check and saying, here. You don't, you have to think about, there are expenses that you can control, and there are expenses that are harder to control. But I'd say the least expensive adoption that happened within the past 2 years that I know of was $15,000. And so usually they range between $25,000, which is very inexpensive, to $40,000, and it can be more than $40,000. And that is if you do a private adoption. With that private adoption is you work with an attorney, and you are basically doing all the work. You're advertising for a birth mother. You're doing all the, you're talking to the birth mother, all this kind of stuff. If you go through an agency, it can be a little more expensive. They do more of the work, but also you have a little less control. So with adoption, you're deciding, okay, am I going to do agency adoption? Am I going to do a private attorney adoption? And then you have to pick an attorney. Do I want an attorney who's hourly? Do I want an attorney with a retainer who might, so basically then you just pay one price. It's very set, and they may do a lot of things for you. Or help guide you through the process, that is. So there is a tax credit for adoption. It's, I believe for 2019, it's $14,080. And a tax credit as opposed to a tax deduction. So a tax credit is, let's say you owe $20,000 in taxes. If you have a tax credit of $14,000, then you will pay $6,000 in taxes. So you are basically getting money back in a way. But usually most people don't spend $14,000 in 1 year. The average time it takes to adopt is about 1 year and 2 months, but it can take longer and it can take shorter. So that's the deal. And what else? If you did a foster care adoption, which I'm just going to touch on, there is a lot more funding for foster care adoption, especially if the child has a medical diagnosis. But you also have to consider there might be an emotional cost. You're taking care of a disabled child. You may need to parent for longer. You have to, there's a lot of things to consider if you decide to do that. So there's the information overload, there's the financial overload, there's a time crunch. So if you go to the doctor, let's say you and your spouse have been trying to get pregnant for a year, and you go to a reproductive endocrinologist, and they say your FSH is close to 10, and if you want to do an IVF and you want to have a child that's genetic, you better act fast. I recommend that you do an IVF as soon as possible. So you have to sort of decide, are you going to do that? So there are situations where there's a kind of a time crunch. And then there's also just once you decide to do an IVF, donor egg is less taxing in terms of appointments. But it means a lot of trips to the doctor. They're monitoring you during the cycle almost every day. They're looking at your eggs. How developed are your eggs? You go in for the transfer too. They take the eggs out of you. They fertilize them. They put them back in you. And it's just you're in and out of the clinic. You're basically living there. So that can be difficult to schedule. If you have a busy job, that's a consideration. And with adoption, it's very busy in terms of paperwork. There is a tremendous amount of paperwork. The first thing that you have to do if you decide that you want to adopt is you need to get a home study. So depending on the state you're in New York State, you can have a social worker do a home study. If you live in New Jersey, you have to have an agency home study. So if you live in New York, you can also have an agency home study, which is more thorough. So basically what it means is a social worker will come to your home. They'll say, where's baby? They'll ask you a lot of questions. And this can be kind of stressful. And a lot of people who've just gone through the ego deflation of learning that they're infertile, they may have gone through IVF. Maybe a little insecure. A lot of people believe I have to have a dedicated bedroom for my baby. That's actually not true. You just need to have a plan. You need to have a guardian plan. You need to have, you need to kind of understand what you're getting into in terms of parenting. You need to understand your whole life is going to change. There can't be any red flags. You can't have criminal history. They do a very, very thorough check. You have to get fingerprinted. You have to have a child abuse clearance. It's just a lot to sort of manage administratively. It's a lot of work, a lot of paperwork. And then after you get approved in your home study, the state approves you as an adoptive parent. They say you can go ahead. Then most people will set up a website. So now you're looking for a birth mother if you're doing a private adoption. You go to an agency, there's less to do. But if you decide that you want to go through a private attorney, which will give you a little more control, you have to create a website. You have to create what's called the birth mother book, which is an actual book that you create with pictures, and it kind of describes who you are, describes where you live, describes the kind of parent you want to be. It has all kinds of information. It has your friends and family in there. And so that birth mother book might be given to a prospective birth mother. This is a woman who decides that she wants to give her baby up for adoption, and she is looking for a family or a person. And actually, single women are the fastest growing demographic who are adopting children. So a lot of times it might be a single woman, sometimes it's a single man, sometimes it's the same-sex couple. And so you give the birth mother book, and that's how the birth mother might choose you. So then you figure out, am I doing Instagram? Am I have a Facebook community page? You're basically creating an advertising campaign. Whether you have a marketing or advertising history or not, whether you are good at social media or are comfortable with social media, it's kind of the thing that most people will do. People still do print ads, it's not as much, but it's mostly using the internet. Some people do Google ads, and it can get very expensive, so you need an advertising budget. So that's a lot of stuff to do. So you do all that stuff. It takes a couple of months, and then what you do is wait. So you're waiting. You're going on Instagram every day. Maybe you're going on Facebook every day. You're checking your special. You have a special dedicated email account. You have a special dedicated phone because you need to have some anonymity because you're online. And so the waiting period can be really rough because, when you're anxious, it can even sometimes be helpful to have a lot of things to do, and you know what the right thing and the wrong thing to do is. But when you're waiting, you're not quite sure. Am I doing the right thing? Should I do something else? the phone might be ringing. The other thing that can happen with adoptions is there are financial and emotional scams that happen that are very common. So less common, I think, are the financial scams where somebody sees you online and they are trying to extort money from you, and they pretend to be a birth mother. And one of the expenses with adoption is you pay for birth mother expenses through and only through your attorney. So it's really important to have an attorney once you start advertising, to have prospective birth mothers speak to them, because a savvy attorney will know what's a scam. But the thing that's the most stressful and kind of annoying is there are emotional scams. So basically, it's often women who want attention. They might have personality disorders, and they will pretend to be birth mothers. And they may text, they may call you, and they kind of have a ruse. And when you're starting out, it's hard to know what's real and what's not real. And you're hopeful, and some people are feeling desperate. And you can kind of waste a lot of time with somebody who isn't maybe even pregnant, probably even pregnant. And that is stressful. So you have to learn, you have to have a system for dealing with this, and you need a lot of support. So there's a lot. There's a lot to each of these.
Carolyn, you mentioned scams and the financial expenses, and as I was listening, I'm thinking to myself, how many viewers perhaps don't have insurance or have very, very basic kinds of insurance. How many might be living paycheck to paycheck? So for the numbers that I put up earlier in terms of statistics, and we're talking about the millions of families struggling with infertility every year, and over what period of time it would take for somebody trying to get pregnant, not being able to qualify as you are infertile, which obviously means visits to the doctors, medical care, and so forth. I'm sort of wondering now to what extent some of those statistics might be really underestimates, because I can't help but think that there must be a lot of people out there who don't have insurance or who can't afford to go through 4 cycles, let alone one, who from the get-go would be in some ways financially discriminated against because they can't. And then tying that into scams, how many of them who really want to have a child and they can't might be relegated to looking to borrow money, to looking to see if they can max out their credit cards or get credit, or go to what amounts to loan sharks. And I'm wondering, this is just a notion that it's hitting me now as we're going through this, but I'm wondering what would those people who are not in the upper middle class range be able to do, and what experience or if you've seen that, do they in fact get in trouble because they look to borrow money, or they get an uncle from Uruguay or from Ecuador to send the money, or they're selling their medication pills to try to raise the money. I'm just off the top of my head, if you have some comments on that.
It is an excellent question. One thing they can do is adopt an older child. It's one thing that will be a lot less expensive, will be a lot faster. There's a ton of children who are older who would love to be adopted. That is one thing. I know that within certain communities of, say, religious Jews, they may find out about a pregnancy within the community. And obviously, it will be word of mouth. They won't have to do advertising. It may be a situation where you don't have to have as much money, because the legal costs alone are not that bad if you're just talking about purely the legal cost. So there may be ways that you can adopt. I guess you have to be creative, and I know there's a lot of books out there about adopting for less. And we're also keeping in consideration that my numbers are based on the fact that we're in New York City. It's one of the most expensive places to be. New York and New Jersey are quite expensive to live. It may be less expensive in other areas.
Do people, because of the financial burden and time involved, at some point in time, would that at some point in time affect their parenting later on? Would that, I don't want this child anymore. I can't afford it. It's like, this is too much. Would that cause a lot of friction, either if they already have a child or they're with a partner, that they're just having increased relationship struggles and arguments? Is that something significant?
I don't know. I haven't come across that. I think it depends on the culture that you're into. You might have nieces and nephews and children that you can engage with. It could be. I think that when you have, I wanted to sort of say something positive about parenting, if I might, because we only have a couple of minutes left. And that even though I'm sort of talking about all the stressors and problems about this, I wanted to say, despite all of this shigas, that parenting, and even despite the fact that if you have prior trauma, all of this can sort of create a lot of depression and anxiety. They're very frustrating processes, they're very expensive processes. That being said, parenting can be an incredibly healing experience. And if you've always wanted to be a parent and you're not a parent, and you really want to be a parent, you're not ambivalent about it at all, it's much better for a child, for a child to be raised by you as opposed to a birth parent who might be ambivalent. So once you become a parent, after all of this, everybody I know who has adopted, despite any troubles they had in the process, have all said it was completely worth it. All that they had to go through, raising the child, everything that happened, they say it was worth it. And I just want to kind of stress that, because I feel that I'm trying to kind of give you a snapshot of what a person who is dealing with infertility or choices that they might need to make. At the same time, it is important to kind of stay in touch with your heart in terms of, and stay in touch with what you really and truly want. And somehow it all works out. Every parent who adopts also says, you will get, if you keep going, you will get the child you're supposed to get.
But that's why it's so important to be informed and to actually be open to the process, understanding it, learning it, become more insightful as to your own needs, be open and transparent with a partner if you have a partner and it's not a single parent adoption. So I think that this is something, part of the advice that we would have for anybody, including the viewers, that it's not necessarily something to be just casually looked into, but it's also perhaps not something to give up too quickly, that you're going to have stumbling blocks along the way, and that's okay. If you have stumbling blocks, you pick up, you continue to go on. If something this way doesn't work, see if this way, see if a plan B works, see if there's some other way, and don't immediately give it up, but don't go into it too much foolishly expecting that like next weekend you're going to be a parent. That's not going to happen. So it's got to really be informed and be on top of it. You had mentioned support, and I think that the support is crucial. I mean, obviously support of family, support of friends, agencies, your doctor, religious support for people who have a religion and believe and go to temples or to churches or Christian church or Muslim, whatever their faith is. If they have a faith, perhaps that can also be a source of support for you. So I think all of that is important. You were also mentioning your talking points. I think I jumped ahead a little bit, that single women is the fastest growing group to adopt.
Yes, true. I wanted to mention also, before I forget, the Adoptive Parents Committee has a conference, a yearly conference in New York, and that is happening this Sunday, and it's very inexpensive. So most of the support groups and support organizations are very inexpensive to join. It's a way to get a lot more information about the process. It's a great conference, and if I can't remember, I think it's something like $40 or $50 for the whole day, and maybe $10 for a bag lunch. And they do a fantastic job. And it will be this Sunday in Brooklyn at St. Francis College. So you have to go to their website and register if you are interested. So I highly recommend, if you've been thinking about adoption and you're not really sure what to do, that you go to this conference and check it out.
Okay, you just have to be geographically in the area, but I'm sure that there's so many other places that have these kinds of resources, and we'll get into that a little bit when we put up the references. Oscar, can you put on slide 7? I wanted to focus on some takeaway suggestions. We'll try to summarize some of these very important points that Carolyn raised. Slide 7, suggestions for the viewers. There it goes. So here, I thought I'd throw in this thing at the top. Having a child is one of the most important and emotionally challenging experiences of your life. So going forward means that you have to be fully committed. Okay, so we talked a little bit about that you may not be 100% sure committed at the beginning. You've been thinking about it. On the other hand, it may have been on your mind for a long time, but it's going to require your full commitment as you go forward. Is your partner on board if you have a partner? Decide what method you'd like to pursue. Carolyn shared several methods. She talked about the relative cost factor. It is expensive. There's nothing that is absolutely El Zippo. There's going to be money involved in this. You have to brace yourself for that. It's not like getting a car loan and buying a car. Okay, this is a human being, and it's going to be an addition to your family, and it's going to involve cost. Be fully informed. We did talk about this. I'm just re-emphasizing this particular topic, this particular theme. Background information about service providers. Carolyn, she told you, find out about the doctors, find out the agencies. By all means, look into them. With the caveat that you should also exercise some care and to avoid information overload. There's going to be overkill too. So I think probably a good way to look at it is do a reasonable search into the providers and into the methods that you are interested in. What references did you look at? Where did you get those references? How did you come to know them? What resources did you explore? Have you considered suggested referrals? If someone made a particular recommendation, did you take it into consideration, yes or no? If yes, why? If not, why not? What's involved in making the decision? Who is part of that decision? It's not just you. It may be a partner. Are you considering family members, other people as part of you making the decision? You're going to be looking at the cost. Carolyn, again, shared quite a bit of information about that. What are the potential obstacles? Obviously, money. You being able to finance this thing, even when you're getting tax breaks, you still have to be able to put the money out up front and then wait to get the money back. You're still going to have to make the allocation. And if there's interest involved in using your credit card, that's going to be on you as well. What are the risks involved? Are there any medical risks to you? Medications you have to take? Medications have risks themselves. What are the medical risks involved? If you are adopting, you may adopt a child who has medical needs. What are those medical needs? What are educational, other kinds of needs that that child may have, depending on if it's a somewhat older child? What's the time commitment? Carolyn, I believe you were saying about 1.2 years, somewhere in that area. So if that's just like a baseline, I'm sure it can go a lot higher than that. You need to consider, with taking breaks and all of that, how long would the process take? How long should you stick to a particular process? You tried 4 cycles, they didn't work. Do you go to a 5th cycle? Do you go to a 6th cycle? Do you change your mind and say, okay, now is the time for me to consider adoption? Is the fact that you tried IVF and it failed, does that mean that adoption is for you? It might not be for you. You know, it's not an automatic, you go from one method to another. You still have to consider, is this something that is good for you? Will you be able to do this? And consider you're bringing a child into your family. Will it be good for your child too? If something doesn't work out, what's your plan B? Is there another choice, something else for you to do? Oscar, you can take down slide 7. I know that, Carolyn, you're already talking a little bit about that. Anything more to add about these kinds of practical tips, practical suggestions for the viewers?
I agree with you. Do not use a credit card. Whatever you do, where there's a will, there's a way. If you decide that you want to do something somehow and you decide, you know how much it costs, you're going to find a way to get what you want. And there's lots of different ways to be a parent. If you are not able to have a child using your body, doesn't mean you can't be a parent. It doesn't mean you will be in any way be a lesser parent. It doesn't mean you're a lesser woman if you have infertility. It doesn't mean you're a lesser man if you have infertility. The whole goal is parenthood, and it's lots of different ways to get there.
What you're saying is that a successful journey is a wonderful, wonderful experience.
It's worth it in the end, everybody.
It's an enlightening experience. You learn a lot about yourself. It's a healing process for yourself so that you become more resilient, and you're taking on the responsibility of caring for a life that you're the one who has to take care of that. So that's really a lot of obligation, a lot of growth, a lot of emotional maturity. And certainly, I didn't want to in any way, suggest by looking at potential difficulties, the cost and the time, to suggest don't do this. What I'm suggesting is you have to weigh in your options and consider what you can do and what will work for you. Not automatically say I can't do this, but consider what can. Problem solving. We as psychologists, we teach our patients to look at problems. You have a problem. What are potential solutions that you can envision? This is your goal. How can you get to your goal? What have you tried? What have you not tried? Have you considered this? You can't make the decision for your patient. I can't make the decision for my patient. I can't make the decision for the viewers. But I can suggest that there's a process, and it's called problem solving. And you sort of sit down, think it out, grab a piece of paper, put down all the pros, all the cons, put it away, take some time. You were talking about, Carolyn, about having fun during the process. It shouldn't be torture. Take some time off. Enjoy yourself. Continue with your life. You have other obligations. You have work. You may go to school. You may have other involvements in your life. Take a break. Have fun. Enjoy yourself.
Wait by the phone if you're trying to adopt or in between IVFs. You should have your life. Shouldn't stop your life.
Absolutely.
And make sure the people around you are being supportive. If you have negative Nellies around you, you don't want that around you.
No, and that may mean being able to say no to somebody who is like trying to bend your ear in a direction that you really are not interested. You know, you may have to be able to say, well, I don't agree with you, and it's my decision anyway. Thanks for your suggestion, but this is what I'm planning to do. You don't really want too many people interfering and giving you like their negative vibes, you know, especially if that's not going to be particularly helpful for you. On the other hand, you don't want to isolate yourself either. You don't want to exclude people. You don't want to not share things with people. You need to like be open and try to, at least, you know, certainly starts by being open with yourself and being open with your partner. But you have to be able to reach out to people. If you have questions, ask questions. I didn't put that down on that last slide, but by all means, ask questions. If you have questions, you know, about for the doctor, for the agencies, write them down. Take the questions with them and ask. Oscar's already giving me the evil eye, but we're not finished. Give me one more slide, Oscar, okay? Slide 8, the resources, and I promise you we'll be done. So, Carolyn, at the top, with your permission, I put down your name, your office address, and phone number, 347-306-3454. There are several agencies here that I have listed. I don't personally know them. I did look them over. They certainly have wonderful websites. I encourage people to check them out. Feel free to look at other resources. ¿Me puede bajar el slide, Oscar? Thank you. So, ¿no quiere bajar the slide, or you want to keep it up? You can lower the slide. There's certainly a lot of information that's out there. Carolyn, it's my understanding that November is National Adoption Month.
Yes, it is.
Right, and there's some event going on besides this Saturday. There's something else going on. I think there's something. But National Adoption Month should mean the whole country, not just New York. Should mean.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I believe it's the whole country.
So listen, I wanted so much to thank you for being my guest. Do you have any last parting words for Oscar before he comes here and throws me off stage, or for our viewers before we end the show?
I don't know what to say to Oscar. He's a very nice man. I met him briefly. For the viewers, I would just say, just don't give up hope, and you will have the life that you're supposed to have. Just keep plugging away.
And I would add that a good starting point is certainly to reach out and talk. Talk to some of those references, or contact those references we gave you. Reach out, talk to a pastor, to a rabbi, you know, to your anyone important of significance in your life. Get the information. Don't give up. You can always contact me. You know me. I'm on the internet. Feel free to contact Dr. AlRoy if you have more questions or comments for her. Don't contact Oscar. So I wanted again to emphasize the show is being recorded, YouTube, live right now. It'll be available immediately after the show. And by tomorrow, it'll be available on Tribuna TV, Vimeo, Facebook, and several other shows. I did also want to say thank you to all the viewers. You know, we hope that this show has been informative and of interest to you all. We have Thanksgiving next week. So I wanted to hope and extend my hopes that everybody has a wonderful, safe holiday. And if this is the time of the year that you're thinking about adoption or having a child, you're doing it during the holiday. So that gives you something extra to look at and to consider. So please, everybody, be safe out there. Have a wonderful, safe holiday. The next shows for me next month in December will be on December 12th. And December 19th, and we'll be focusing on holidays and cultural kinds of issues and people who may be feeling depressed during that time of the year. So, con eso, un abrazo a todos los televidentes. My greetings to all of you. Thank you, Carolyn, so much. Oscar, thank you too. And good night, everybody.
Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.